need to get you with a hook, you know, like they do on the stage. Hey Frank, how you doing? Oh, you got the tickets.
Difficult getting everybody in here, isn't it?
Sure, if you want to sit over there, there's a spot in there by Frank. That'd be. I said there's a spot by Frank that might be a good place for you to sit if you want to be right up front.
I should sit over there by Frankie.
He doesn't have cooties as far as I know. Okay, it's time to start. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. And as you know, we're the Contradited Native Plant Society. Our mission is to promote the preservation, conservation, restoration of the...
Into that mic, please.
Is it? Okay, there you go. Okay. Plants and native plant communities of Florida. So that's our mission. As you know, we meet the second Monday of every month from September to May. Please, no food or drinks in the sanctuary. And silence your cell phones and try to keep conversations to a minimum. We received last week from the Audubon Society down in Indian River County from Dr. Baker an award for Environmental Landscape Award. So that was kind of a big honor. We've supported their transforming landscapes for the last several years. Okay, and the upcoming events. This Saturday, which is the 13th, we're going to have our Botanical Fest at the 1900 building and on Harbor City Boulevard there. And that will run from 8 a.m. to at Fred Pop Malabar, which is near Annual Sustainability Day. And that runs from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. And I believe they're going to show a movie toward the end of that. And then on the 20th, in Satellite Beach at the DRS Community Center, which is at 1089 South Patrick Drive in Satellite Beach. We're having our Earth Day event there. We'll be over there. And then the following Saturday, the 27th, we'll be at the Turkey Creek Day, which runs from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., and that's down by the library there. Turkey Creek Sanctuary. It's 1518 Port Malabar Boulevard in Palm Bay. And next month, we have our speaker is going to be Mark Spees, and he's going to give us an introduction to invasive grasses in Florida. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Carol about refreshments and a couple other announcements.
All right. Thank you so much. I may not lead that microphone. Everybody can hear me okay though? Yes? No nodding? I should be on that. Is that what she's pointing to?
I can hear you. I just need you to wear the microphone.
Oh, the microphone.
Oh. Thank you. Okay, everybody's good? Do you mind if I stand down here instead? I might. I know, I'm a strange individual. But my ankle hurts and I can't really go up and down stairs too easily. There's the honesty. I'm ready to speak a little louder so everybody can hear me well. First thing I wanted to cover was the Downtown Botanical Festival. I'm so happy that a lot of people that are coming. I have had a couple that have canceled because they thought it was on that different day. So I'm not going to pass this around, but if you would like to help out, Friday night we go there, set everything up. Saturday is on the second page. And so I have different shifts that you can come. So I will keep this one. I won't force you all to look at this one. But if you're in, would like to be with the Downtown Botanical Festival, let me know and come up to me and I will get you signed up. The other one is the Turkey Creek Day, which is pretty fun. It's right there. We're kind of in the shade, but we're right there next to the Palm Bay Library, and it's right there by Turkey Creek. So that'll be a really fun day, and it's from 9 to 2. And again, I think I have enough, but if that's something you want to help and participate in, I would be glad for you to just come on up to me and say you want to help out. So I'm going to hold on to those two.
What day is that, though?
The one for the Turkey Creek Day is on Saturday, April 20th. Last weekend of the month. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, definitely. And how many enjoyed those refreshments out there? Absolutely delicious. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm just going to call out first names. I had a bunch of people do great things and bring them in nicely. There was fruit, there was cookies, there was nuts. It was very diverse. So we had Harry and Sarah and Linda and Mary and Dave and Karen, Christine, Elaine, Rachel. Joan was out sick today, so I brought in her tea and lemonade, and Catherine. So we had, let's give them a round of applause because we really appreciate those goodies. All right, this one I am passing around. As you heard, next meeting is about, Mark is such a cool individual. He works down at the Environmental Learning Center, and it's right down across the road, across the border into Indian River County. It's right down there by the Sebastian Inlet. And he's going to be talking about the invasive plants. So, oh shoot, I left it out in the car. Eek. So I will have to, I don't have my sign-up sheet for that next meeting. But think about it. Maybe I'll just turn one over. I apologize, it's out in the car. And we can, I'm going to pass this blank sheet of paper around, and it will be for the next meeting, which is May 13th? See, I don't even have it because it's not on my paper. So I'll need people to sign up. I had a couple people, I think just the beverages were Catherine and Harry, and Frank. And one person was with some food. So I'm kind of sprawling for answers and questions on this. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're interested in bringing any refreshments for the next meeting, go ahead and write it down, and I always tell everybody well in advance. I apologize for that, not having my sign-up sheet. Okay, the only other thing is I do have some, myself, Karen, and David are with the nominating committee, and we're looking by next month's meeting, we're going to be electing a couple of new officers, a couple of new board members, and it's going to be blast to get energy into our system. And so I have a couple of blank applications. If you're interested, you can come up to me and I can get one of these. It kind of just tells you what the requirements are and what you're going to need to do and help with, and then just sign it off and let me know about it. So let me know about that. Am I babbling about anything else, or am I done? All right. Jane, I'll turn this over to you. I do. Oh, and let me pass this on. We have to be on Zoom together.
Okay. I don't know if that's going to work. Hi. How many people here are from Palm Bay? Yay. Okay. Well, we have a special event going on with the City of Palm Bay on Saturday, April 20th at 4 p.m. We only need 10 to 12 volunteers, so that's a very limited number. I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet. What we're going to be doing is putting in native plants at Hardin Lane Pond. And if you're not over at Veterans Memorial Park, all the info's on here if you want to take a picture with your phone, because we have to get shuttled into the site, okay? We can't park at the site. And it's a retention pond that basically has this little island sticking into it that they want to plant with native plants. And there are several groups of people from the Sustainability Board. I'm one of those that are recruiting 10 to 12 people each. So it's just, you know, several groups meet, plant plants. We don't have to maintain them. We don't have to water them. Just get the plants in the ground. So I'm hoping that we can get 10 to 12 Conradina interested people to sign up tonight. Okay? Any questions? That's a lot to throw at you, I know. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica. So you have to wear this too. It's like, oh dear, just gets tangled up in there.
Okay, I made an announcement last meeting about this. We have a few native gardens that have been planted from grants or different reasons in the past. There's one at West Melbourne Post Office, DeGroote Library, and Martin Luther King Library. And we need to start maintaining them on kind of a schedule. So we're going to start off with a volunteer training at the West Melbourne Post Office on May 5th. And then we have a work day at DeGroote Library now scheduled for May 26th. So the volunteer training, I just want to point out that in the schedule of the newsletter this month, it said 10 a.m. It's actually going to be at 8:30 a.m., trying to get ahead of the hot weather before it starts getting warm out. And basically, we're just going to plant a few new plants, go over the plans for how we're going to maintain the gardens, and it's going to be a pretty short day, no more than a couple hours. But if you're interested in either doing that or anything in the future with maintaining the gardens, I want you to sign up on this sheet so I can keep you updated with emails. And that's all. So I'll pass this around. Just pass that. Oops, I'm sorry.
We have a question here. Was there something else on the 20th, something in Satellite Beach or not?
Yeah, there is another event during the day.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks. Oh, okay. Yeah, and I've got the WC.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming today. And I came from Tampa. Did anyone come farther than 3 hours? Because of traffic, yes. So I'm from Niagara Falls, New York, Buffalo, New York. I moved to Florida about 12 years ago. I moved here because I wanted to work at zoos and aquariums, which I did for a few years. And then I became a middle school agriculture and middle school science teacher. And then the pandemic burned me out. And I was doing this part-time, but because of the pandemic, everybody was staying home and they needed to have a plant. So I was able to turn this into a full-time job. And during the pandemic, I wrote a book, the first book, on Florida's native carnivorous plants. And that's what this presentation is going to be about. So Florida has the most native carnivorous plants out of all of the states. So you might think the Carolinas that have the Venus flytrap has a lot of carnivorous plants. But in Florida, we have 33 native carnivorous plants. And then we have one extirpated one, which means it's extinct in the state of Florida, but you can find it in other places. And then we have one non-native. So today we're going to be talking about carnivores. We're going to be talking about organisms that have sharp incisors, organisms that have toxins, and organisms that have really strong grasping power. But we are not talking about animals. We are talking about plants. And plants have all of those same adaptations that animals do. Sadly, there is no carnivorous plant that is large enough to eat a human. The largest one can eat 1 to 3 mice a year, but none of the native ones can. There are 900 species of plants that eat animals, and 0 of them use flowers to trap and kill prey. So whenever you look at their traps, they're modified leaves. So if you look at the screen all the way to the left, we have a North American pitcher plant, and they have beautiful flowers in the springtime, usually February through April. And if you look closely, you'll see that they have these pitchers up, but their pitchers are not opened yet. So they send up these fake pitchers, and that is because after they're pollinated by flying insects, they open up and they eat the very pollinators that had helped them out a few weeks earlier. So they don't want to have their traps and flowers at the same time. And then the pitcher in the middle and the pitcher all the way to the right, that's a butterwort and a Venus flytrap. And they have their active traps at the same time as their leaves. And they avoid eating their prey by differentiating. So they're going to be eating flying, or they're pollinated by flying things, but they eat crawling things. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. So we have about 34 species around Florida, and this is what they eat. And by the way, all of the pictures that you see and all of the diagrams you see are in my book. This is a page from the book. These are the organisms that the carnivorous plants of Florida eat. They eat tiny things like protozoa, rotifers, wasps, ants, and every day, every time I do this presentation, even tonight, somebody said, which one eats mosquitoes? And out of 900 species of carnivorous plants, none of them eat flying mosquitoes because the flying mosquitoes want blood. And carnivorous plants use color and nectar to attract and trap their prey. So mosquitoes are just not interested in carnivorous plants. So today we're going to cover all 33 species, and to figure out why Florida has the most carnivorous plants out of all of the states, you have to go back about 1.5 million years ago to 750,000 years ago, which was the last ice age, the Pleistocene era. And during that time, both of the ice caps were filled with glaciers, and as the glaciers grew, it forced plants to do 2 things. One of them was for them to wish and hope to get a random mutation that allowed them to overwinter, or the second one was for them to migrate south. And if you've ever seen a plant migrate, they do it very slowly. So the way that they would do that is they release their seeds, and the ones that happened to go a little bit further south, they were able to survive, and the ones that stayed up north froze, and then they couldn't pass on their genes, and they kind of slowly marched. So during that time, about 40 carnivorous plants migrated down to the southeast, and the Gulf acted like a little buffer, a little refuge. It moderated our weather, so we had 4 seasons, and lots of plants like 4 seasons. And a couple of other things happened, but first let me tell you, this was a really long time ago. There was giant ground sloths roaming Tennessee and Florida. There was giant 7-foot, 7-inch tall camels roaming the west, and there was these giant cats called smilodons. So it was a very long time ago. And the reason why the carnivorous plants did so well down here is because back then we had a lot of naturally occurring wildfires. And carnivorous plants don't need wildfires, but when a fire comes through, it burns the taller shrubs and trees, and then the carnivorous plants get access to more sunlight. So all 900 species of carnivorous plants photosynthesize, but they don't do it as well as a non-carnivorous plant. So if you want to get energy from the sun, you want to be flat and you want to be facing the sun. But if you think of a Venus flytrap, half of it is facing the ground, right? Half of it's facing the wrong way. Or if you think of a pitcher plant, it's a cone, so none of it's really facing the sun. So carnivorous plants need usually more sun than non-carnivorous plants. So when a fire comes through, it gives them that. And then as the glaciers retreated, the globe got a little bit warmer. What scares scientists is out of the 40 carnivorous plants that migrated down here, only about 5 have been able to migrate back up north in the past 10,000 years. So scientists want to know if the environment changes faster than it has in the past 10,000 years, will these plants be able to adapt? So today we have 1 pitcher plant that has colonized the East Coast up into Canada, up into Michigan, and we still have 7. So 1 out of 7 was able to leave Florida, and then 1 out of 5 sundews was able to go up and down the East Coast, and it's up into New Jersey now. Like I mentioned earlier, carnivorous plants like a lot of sun. So in my book, remember all of these photos are in the book. And the caption for this photo says, if you're looking for carnivorous plants, a great place to find them is underneath telephone lines or power lines, because those areas mow frequently so they can service those electrical things. And then that mowing kind of mimics what a fire would do, right? It gets rid of the taller shrubs or trees. And we are approaching about 2,500 copies of my book sold, which I'm very excited about. And once we sell about 3,000, we have to print more. And that's a good problem to have. And when we print more, the caption for this photo is going to be a little bit different. So this colony of Sarracenia minor this photo was taken in Volusia County. And since the printing of the book, which is just like a year and a half ago, this population no longer exists because Volusia County has decided to spray herbicides on this property. People always boo at me every presentation. So Volusia County has decided to spray once a year rather than mow twice a year. And this is just one county. Lots of counties have decided to swap that. And the last reason why Florida has the most carnivorous plants is because for North America's carnivorous plants, they like it really wet. And here is a map that was drawn about 300 years ago from the Franciscan monks. And when they came over, they were talking to the indigenous people, and those people said that you could canoe coast to coast from about Tampa south. So the bottom half of the peninsula, you could canoe coast to coast, and that's how wet it was. And that's probably true because when they came over here, the Everglades River was 8 to 11 feet higher than it is today. And they saw giant lizards that they had never seen before swimming in the water. They saw orchids and beautiful flowers that they have never seen before. And they decided, you know what we should do? Let's change Florida, and let's drain the swamp. So this was like mid-1800s, but in 1904, and Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, I don't know if we should be booing again, he ran and won the governorship with the motto, "Water will run downhill." He promised everyone that they could be cotton and sugarcane farmers because he was going to drain Florida. This is in 1904. At the same time, Frank Stoneman was an editor at the Miami Herald, and he said, yes, Florida is a wasteland. Yes, Florida is filled with mosquitoes, it's filled with water, but it's going to be too expensive, too much time, too much energy to drain all of Florida. We should not elect this person, and we should not drain Florida. At the same time, Mayman Jennings, she was looking at the surveys that were being done in the 1800s, and she said, I bet we could get people to visit Florida to see these giant lizards swimming, and to see these unique palms, and to see these unique orchids. And she's photographed here, probably wearing an endangered or an extinct bird feather, but she's nicknamed the mother of Florida forestry because she was able to establish the first state parks. Let me back up. She said that if we saved pieces of Florida, we could have up to 1,000 people visit Florida a year. Today, we have about 1,400 people moving to Florida a day. About 1910, a little bit later, Minnie Moore Wilson was talking to the Miccosukee and the Seminole Indians, and she was seeing how they were living sustainably with nature and not against it, and she thought we should do the same. Many years later, 1947, we get this woman signing a book, and she's quoted as saying, "It is a woman's business to be interested in the environment. It's an extended form of housekeeping." And this is Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. And remember, I moved to Florida about 11, 12 years ago. I taught middle school agriculture and life science, biology. And let me tell you, my students do not know who Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is. Their parents do not know who Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is. They only associate school shooting with that name. And her birthday was yesterday. And in 1947, she published the book, The Everglades River of Grass. And she is the daughter of Frank Stoneman, who said that Florida was a wasteland. She did not believe him. And she went and studied the Everglades for about 5 to 7 years. She published this book. And then about 8 months later, the National Everglades Park was established. This is in 1947. In 1969, when she was 79 years old, she had to start the Friends of the Everglades nonprofit because people were still trying to grow sugar cane within the border of the Everglades National Park. And they built like a quarter of an international runway for international air travel inside the Everglades. So, why have we talked about that? Because the Everglades host 1 out of the 3 of the state's carnivorous plants, so they have about 10 species. In the Panhandle, we have about 10 species, and then all throughout the state, we have another 10 species. And without those people, we wouldn't have those carnivorous plants. And in the Everglades, seen here, is all of the endangered carnivorous plants that are only found there. The rest of the presentation is actually going to introduce you to the carnivorous plants that you can find in the state of Florida. The first one we're going to talk about is this. And in the book, I mentioned why scientific names are really important. Last June, just kidding, last May, I went to Japan for the International Carnivorous Plant Society meeting. There was 140 people, 70 people were from Japan, and then 70 people were from all over the world. Lots of Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Australians. And there's 900 plants that eat flies. So if you say fly trap, it might be confusing. So scientific names are important. And this May, next month, I'm going to Vienna, Austria for the International Carnivorous Plant Society meeting. And then in 2025, we take off. But then in 2026, we're going to be in the Americas, which could be North, Central, or South America. So we usually have it every other year, but because of the pandemic, Japan conference got bumped back 4 years. So that's why we have 2 back to back. So the first carnivorous plant we're going to be talking about is the Venus flytrap. The scientific name is Dionaea muscipula. And this was named about 200 years ago. Unfortunately, back then, only men could be biologists, only men could be naturalists. And the men were walking around the Carolinas, and then they saw this plant. They said, oh, it hinges like a mouse trap. So that's where you get muscipula from. That means mouse trap. And these men were out there in the woods for a very long time, alone. And they named it Dionaea, which is one of the 4 Greek goddesses. And those are the Greek goddesses of love and beauty and sex and romance. Because they said when they looked at this plant, it reminded them of a female anatomy. That's right. I don't see it, so we'll keep moving on. So in the entire world, Venus flytraps are only native to the Carolinas. They're native to both Carolinas, the North Carolina and South Carolina. About 100 kilometers, which is about 60 miles. But in 1972, somebody started planting them in the panhandle of Florida. And that bog is about as big as this room, and that population still exists 52 years later. We call them non-native because we don't call them invasive because they haven't gone anywhere, but they were added after the 1800s, so they're called non-native. The way that they work is they have these little trigger hairs, and if you or a bug touches one of those trigger hairs, nothing happens. But if you or the bug touches that trigger hair twice, within 20 seconds, water gets moved from the inside to the outside, and because there's more water on the outside, it's heavier, and then it snaps shut. So it takes a lot of energy. You don't want to just play with them. Oh, let me back up. Let's see if this video works. You can imagine it. The more the animal struggles, or the more you touch it, the tighter it closes, and it takes 4 to 10 days for them to digest their meal. Oh, here we go. Nah. So each of the traps can only open and close 3 times, and then they turn black and they die. So here we have 2 perfectly healthy pictures of Venus flytraps. Each picture is showing you 1 plant. But do you see how there's a lot of black leaves, right? So that means that that trap, which is 1 leaf, has opened and closed 3 times, it's done, and it's going to turn black and die. If you stick your finger in there 3 times, it gets tired. But if it's eating something, then it gets more energy, and then you should have new leaves coming up from the center. All right, the next group of carnivorous plants that are from Florida are the pitcher plants. We have 7 different types. The way that they work is underneath their lid, they have some nectar, and that nectar contains a chemical called conine, and that's the same chemical that's found in poison ivy and poison hemlock, and it makes the bugs drunk. So they get a little intoxicated, they fall down into the well, and in that well, there's some digestive enzymes that prevents their wings from, it's really thick, so it prevents their legs and wings from working. And then it takes these plants 2 weeks to 2 months to digest their meal. And they're eating little flying things or ants. If a big thing like a salamander or a frog or a spider goes in there, what they do is they actually steal the plant's food, and then they just crawl back out. All right, so these are the different types of pitcher plants that are native to Florida. We do not have Sarracenia alabamenensis that is only found in Alabama, but we have a subspecies of it called wearii. And when I say subspecies, the difference is that the distance between them is so great that they can't interbreed with each other. And our one that kind of looks like the one that's found in Alabama is smaller than the one that's found in Alabama. And we do not have Sarracenia rubra. That's only found on the Atlantic coast, but we do have some that are in the Gulf, and they're much bigger than the ones on the Atlantic coast, but the distance is so great that they can't interbreed. So that's why we call them a subspecies. We have several different types of flava. Flava means yellow, so we have lots of different pitcher plants that have yellow flowers. Here we have two different pitchers. We have some that have these really dark purple veins. We have some that have white or green tops. We have some that are all green but have a red patch. And we say that these are the same species because they have the same flower, even though they look very different. The next one we have is Leucophylla, which means white top. And all of them have this, but if you look closely underneath their lid, there's these little bristle hairs. And when the insect is drinking the nectar and they're going like down into this tunnel, they might be thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't go into this cavern. But when they try to back up, those hairs poke them, and they kind of encourage them to go further down. And then that first lip part is very slippery, and then they fall down. The next one is Sarracenia minor. This is the only one that you can find down here over to Tampa. All of the other ones are in the Panhandle. Sarracenia minor was the first one to be discovered by Europeans in 1536, the year 1536. And they didn't know that it was a carnivorous plant until 1887. More than 200 years it took them to figure out that it was a carnivorous plant. The next one is Sarracenia psittacina. This one, instead of being upright, is horizontal. And you can see this floating down rivers and creeks up in the Panhandle. And then the last one is Sarracenia rosea. I brought a couple of these with me. These are short and squat. They only get a couple of inches tall. And this one is endemic. It is only found in the state of Florida. But there's one that's very similar to this that you can find in the states above us, all the way up to Canada, over to Michigan. So we have Sarracenia rosea because it has rose flowers. But there's another one called Sarracenia purpurea. And for that one, over 30 species reproduce inside the carnivorous plant pitcher. Protozoa, algae, all the way up to moths and caterpillars and fly midges and things like that. And that's because Sarracenia purpurea and rosea, instead of their lids, remember how the lids were over those pitchers? Their lids are all the way furled back. And instead of using their own digestive enzymes, they use symbiotic bacteria to break down their food. So we have lots of millions of different types of bacteria in our gut to break down our food. And these two species of pitcher plants don't have their own. They rely on another organism, lots of different species of bacteria to break it down. So that enzyme, so that liquid in the pitcher isn't very strong, and that's why over 30 species can reproduce in there. So I hope you're thinking, wow, those are some really sexy plants that Kenny just showed me. And I agree with you, yes they were. But that's not really what I mean. Here we have a list of all of the naturally occurring hybrids that you can find in the state of Florida. And that is because these pitcher plants are promiscuous. They will have sex with anything that is near them. And to figure out how they do that, you have to look at their sex organs, which are their flowers, of course. And if you dissect a flower of a pitcher plant, this is what it looks like. And they're pollinated by bees and bumblebees and wasps. And the way that those bugs do it, they only have 4 options to get into the flower. They have to go up and over those drooping sepals, and then they're going to run around this upside-down umbrella. And when they're running around this upside-down umbrella, they're going to be drinking the nectar. And when they do that, they're going to accidentally be picking up the pollen that has been so conveniently caught by this upside-down umbrella. And then when they're ready to leave, they only have 4 options. And they're the 4 holes that are caused by the drooping petals. So then they're going to kind of parachute out of there. And then they're going to go visit their next flower, which is 1 foot away or 100 feet away. And when they do that, they're going to repeat this process. And if you remember 7th grade biology, when pollen and the stigma come together, you get fertilization. So when they repeat that process, they go up and over that drooping sepal, they scrape off the pollen onto that one of those 4 sepals that are in the corner. And that's how you get babies. So that's how the insects do it accidentally, but that's how you could do it on purpose. You can just take a Q-tip or a wet finger, and you can stick it in that upside-down umbrella, pick it up, rub the 4 stigmas in the corners, and then you can make your own hybrid. In the back of each chapter of my book, I have a list, or I have photos of hybrids or species that you can easily find in cultivation. The next group are called Utricularia, that's their scientific name. The common name is bladderwort, and their scientific name means wine flask, leather pouch, or bagpipe. So you can imagine these are going to look pretty cool, and you're right. They look like this, kind of like pond scum. And if you look at them up close, these are their little traps. And remember, these are modified leaves. These are not roots or stolons or rhizomes. These are leaves. And they're under the ground or they're underwater. These are the most sophisticated trap out of all 900 species. And the way that they work is they have these little trigger hairs. And these actually do eat mosquito larvae, but not the ones that bite you. So they'll eat tadpoles, mosquito larvae, little things floating around, rotifers, protozoa. And when that organism touches that little trigger hair, a trap door opens inwards, and it creates this vacuuming effect, and it sucks them up. And this is in 1/1000th of a second. And a Venus flytrap closes in 1/10th of a second. So these are the fastest carnivorous plants in the world. There's about 220 species of them around the world. They're found everywhere except for Antarctica. And here we have a beautiful species that you can find in the state of Florida. They only flower a couple of weeks a year, so like sometimes in the spring, sometimes in the fall. And do you guys see any other plants in this photo? The white ones, exactly. So the white one is a native bladderwort, full grown. And the yellow one is also a bladderwort, full grown. And when they're not flowering, you're going to have to look for those tiny little green things floating around in the water. So it might be a little difficult. The white one is called Utricularia olivaceae. It is not the smallest flower in the world, but it is maybe in the top like 15 and the top 20. Now here we have 2 species of yellow bladderworts. These are 2 different species that I'm showing you. And that is because scientists have decided that because one of them has fewer arms than the other, it's a different species. You see the little floating arms? But don't count them because I did, and all of them have 5 floating arms. And that's because one species has 4 to 7 floating arms, and the other one has 5 to 10 floating arms. So the other way to differentiate them is one of them has tapered floating arms, and the other one has cylindrical floating arms. And there's 3 species that all kind of look like this. The state of Florida has 14 yellow bladderworts, and historically we've had 3 pink ones, and then we have the 1 white one. So if you see the white one, you know what it is. But for the yellow ones, it's a little tricky. In my book, I have a 2-page spread of, like, is it floating? Is it on the ground? How many arms does it have? You know, where can you find it? So it helps you. This picture in the center, that pink one, that one is extirpated, which means it's extinct in the state of Florida. But if you go to South America, like Brazil, you can still find it. This species went extinct about 15 years ago, and that's because we decided to build a section of the I-4 on top of the last known site of it. We still have 2 species that are pink, purple that you can find. The next group are the butterworts, Their scientific name means greasy ones or buttery ones, so if you touch them, they feel slimy or buttery. We have 6 species. They act like flypaper, so they have sticky leaves. And these 2 are going to be found in higher elevations, so these can be found all the way up to 10 feet above sea level. These next 2 are found a little bit lower. They're also found in like pine woods. This next one you can see can be underwater for most of the summer because of the rainy season. This is the only one that is pink or red. And those previous ones that I showed you, a lot of those were threatened or endangered. So if you can find them available, they've probably been taken off of private land, hopefully. Well, you know, not hopefully, but it's better than public land. So those aren't really available. The only one that's available is this one, which is Pinguicula primuliflora. And that is because there's a nursery in Apopka, Florida, that literally makes about 250,000 of them in tissue culture every year. So they're mass producing them. And these are the easiest ones to grow. These also produce pups at the tip of each of their arms. So remember, you know, those like invasive mother of millions or mother of thousands, the succulents that have those little babies on the edge? Well, those are invasive, but this is native. This is not a succulent. And if you can see on the very tip, you have those little babies. So you can pluck those off and grow them around. This is my favorite photo in the entire book. It shows that species colonizing a little mud island. Their common name is a clear water stream. So these plants get about 5 inches in diameter. And these are really easy to grow. You can grow them on a sunny windowsill or outside. And the ones that I brought, all of them are flowering. They have these nice little primrose-like flowers that have pink and white. The next group are the sundews. The sundews are sticky. Around here you have 2 tiny ones. These only get the size of like a dime or a quarter. And people don't really grow these in the backyard because these are kind of like an annual, maybe a biannual. So they only live like a year or 2, and then when they flower themselves to death. And if you don't collect the seeds, you're out of luck. So nobody really sells these. The next...
Does that species have anything to do with Brevard?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so these 2 are very small. Then, like I said, this next one is Drosera intermedia. This likes intermediate conditions. So it likes to be wet, kind of soggy. I brought a couple of these with me. I think I maybe have 2 left. These get maybe 3 or 4 inches. These would do best outside in a very sunny area. So remember, those are only 3 or 4 inches. The next one is Drosera filiformis. These get about 12 to 14 inches tall. They're all red. They're beautiful and dewy. The next one I'll show you is on the cover of my book. So I brought several of these. And then the biggest one we have is Drosera tracei, and these get 20 inches tall. Unlike the filiformis that are red dew, this one's green leaf with green dew. And I brought a couple that are flowering. They have 1 flower a day, and then it closes, and then the next one opens, and you do that for about 10 to 14 days. And then you don't have to do anything. They'll self-pollinate, and you'll get about 200 seeds. And then you could surface sow them on like a soggy area or a soggy pot, and you can have lots of babies. I only brought maybe 4 of these. But what I did bring is maybe 20 hybrids of Drosera filiformis and Drosera tracei, because just like the pitcher plants, these are also promiscuous. About just like 15 to 20 years ago, somebody in California bred our filiformis to tracei, and they registered it as Drosera californica. So the official name of that plant is Drosera californica. And then a few years later, we learned that it is a naturally occurring plant in Florida. But because he registered it first, that name has to stick. So that means we have a plant in the state of Florida, only found in Florida, called californica. The last carnivorous plant that we have in the state of Florida is a carnivorous bromeliad. There's about 5,000 to 8,000 bromeliads. Let's say 8,000. As of today, only 3 of them are classified as carnivorous. And it's a little hard to see, but on the map, it's only in the bottom 3 counties of Florida. This species you can also find in the West Indies, and you can also find it in lots of Central and South American countries. And the other 2 carnivorous bromeliad species are not really closely related to this, but they're also found in South America. And what makes this bromelia different is that this species requires full Florida sun. So if you find it in the Everglades, it's going to be in the canopy, but on the edge, in full blasting sun. And they have this white powder on their leaves, and that white powder prevents insects from seeing UV light. So it causes insects to fly into the leaf more often. They collide into the leaf, and then they roll down, and then they get digested by some symbiotic bacteria. I do not have this species with me, but I do have another carnivorous bromeliad. All right, there's about 268,000 species of flowering plants, 268,000 angiosperms, 900 of which are carnivorous. This does not include ferns and conifers and things like that. So around the world, 268,000. The International Union of Conservation of Nature, they're responsible for saying if a plant or an animal or a fungi is least concern, threatened to extinction, extinct, endangered. Have we heard these words before? They have looked at 30% of all of the flowering plants of the world. So they've only looked at 3 out of 10 plants. And out of the plants that they have looked at, they have deemed 70% of everything they've looked at is vulnerable to extinction, endangered, or critically endangered. So we're not doing very good. And why do we care about that? Because carnivorous plants are disproportionately more endangered and more threatened than non-carnivorous plants. The biggest problem for sundews is agriculture, people spraying pesticides, and then you have poison bugs flying into the plants, and then they die because of that. The next one is the pitcher plants. Their biggest problem, in order, is natural system modifications, people draining the swamps and then building cul-de-sacs and malls. The next one is invasive species, wild hogs digging them up, climbing kudzu and those Asian ferns and air potato, blocking the sun for them. The next one is pollution. The next one is poaching. And the reason why it's so far down on the list is because there isn't enough to poach anymore. So people decided that it's easier to breed them on their own, which is good. And then the last one is agriculture. And David Jennings from the University of South Florida would like to remind everyone that insecticide use above, below, and within the recommended treatment level can be harmful to carnivorous plants. So I know you're not going to be spraying your yard, but if your neighbor sprays their yard, and then your birds go over there, or your frogs go over there and eat the poison bugs, they're going to be transmitting these poisons. So it's nice that we have a native plant society, but we really need to be talking to your neighbors and other people who aren't coming to meetings like this, so they know about it. And then the last one is bladderworts. Their biggest problem is the eutrophication of waterways. And that means there is too many nutrients in the waterways. And the way that you do that is by spraying your non-native lawn with fertilizer. And I don't know if you know this, but it is against Florida law to spray fertilizer if the forecast says it is going to rain in the next 24 hours. It is a state law. You are not allowed to apply fertilizer to your grass. Most counties ban fertilizer for months at a time, like the entire summer months. Some counties are better than others, and they say it's year-round. You can't do it at these certain times or if the forecast says that. So what happens is when people spray their non-native lawn, those fertilizers run off into the sewer, and that sewer goes into the river. And because the river has so many nutrients, algae grows in the river, and it blocks the bladderworts, and then they can't photosynthesize. And then all those nutrients go into the ocean, and red tide events happen, and that kills the seagrass and then hurts the manatees, and then you can't go fishing or boating and you can't breathe. So it's all connected. All right, about 1950, Aldo Leopold, who's a conservationist, is quoted as saying, there are some who can live without wild things and some who cannot. So he was basically saying some people just need to go out there in nature and they love it, while others are okay working a 9-to-5 job in an office. But today we know that we actually all need wild places and wild things to be healthy and happy. If we save carnivorous plant habitat, we're saving the soil that filters the contaminants. We're saving areas that filter our water. We're saving areas that produce oxygen. And these are bigger swamps and bogs, are bigger carbon sinks than the tropical rainforest. So they suck up more carbon than the famous rainforest. Also, if we save their native habitats, we're going to be saving things that provide food and shelter and medicine to animals and maybe ourselves. And if you book me for another presentation, I have a 45-minute presentation about the medicinal uses of carnivorous plants around the world. All right, so how can you help? In the book, I have 12 things. I think we're going to mention 2 today. The first thing is you can educate others about the value of wild habitats. And that's what I just said. And the next thing is you can plant native, or at least non-invasive plants in your yard. So the last section of the presentation is how to grow native carnivorous plants. It's the shortest part of the presentation because it's easy. The first thing you need to do is go get a baby head doll. You will not be able to find them in Tampa because I buy them every week. The biggest thing you need is clean water. Carnivorous plants die from well water and city water. You do not need to experiment. We know the answer. So what you need to do is you need to collect rainwater, and in some places in Florida, it's actually against the law to collect rainwater. Yes, because of Disney, but we can talk about that later. And the other thing is they need to be sitting in water all the time. So at my house, where I have 5,000 carnivorous plants, I have 9 50-gallon rain barrels. So you can use rainwater or you can use distilled water. And before the presentation, somebody was mentioning that they read my book and it was a game changer. Spring water is nothing. Spring water legally means nothing. So people literally fill up bottles of water from this faucet and say, this is spring water. So you need to buy distilled water. Distilled water is when you boil water and you collect the condensation, and that's what you're buying. You cannot leave a bucket of water out for 24 hours, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. The good water evaporates, and then you're left with more minerals and more salts and a higher concentration of things in the bucket. So it might work for fish, but it does not work for carnivorous plants. So you need rainwater or distilled water. And then the second thing is they need to be sitting in 1/8 or 1/4 inch of water all the time. It's very easy. You're going to get a plate or a piece of Tupperware and stick the pot in that, and you're good to go. If you have a pond with or without fish, you can float the plants in the pond. You can put them on a ledge. That second photo on the left shows a claw-footed tub completely filled with water, and there's lava rock sticking out of the water, and then the lava rock has holes drilled in it, and the carnivorous plants are growing inside the lava rock. And then the 2 pictures on the right show a claw-footed tub completely filled with a substrate, and there you go. And I show you these pictures because you can mix and match. So all of the North American stuff that I brought with me, you can mix and match, put it in one big bog, one big tub. All right, the substrates that you're going to use are half peat, half perlite, or half sphagnum moss, half perlite. And peat moss is decomposed sphagnum moss. And it just takes 10,000 years for the sphagnum to decompose into peat moss. So peat moss is not sustainable. And wild carnivorous plants live in peat bogs. So if you want to grow one at home, you probably don't want to be using the substrate that was taken from the wild, where you dredge up all the native ones, right? So instead of peat moss, I use sphagnum moss. And I can start with a 4-inch piece of live sphagnum moss, and I put it in a kiddie pool, like a 4-foot wide kiddie pool. And within about 3 months, it's about 5 inches thick of live sphagnum moss. So you can grow it in live sphagnum moss, and it could be sphagnum moss and perlite. You can also use coconut chips or coconut core, so I use a lot of that. And you can also use pit moss, which is basically shredded cardboard, and you can use half of that and half perlite. Perlite's a volcanic rock. All right, day 1, full sun. North America's carnivorous plants need full sun. Do not ask me if you can grow it in your shady lanai. Do not ask me if you can grow it in your windowless kitchen. You cannot. They need full sun. What does this mean? It means they need to have about 8 hours of full sun outside. The butterworts can be on a sunny window. I do have some non-natives that you can grow inside. And speaking of that, what my nursery is really famous for are these Asian pitcher plants. These grow into 6 to 8 foot long vines. The one in the middle is a red one that has fangs, and those are my favorite. They drip nectar from their fangs, so it looks like the plant is drooling, and then the bugs drink it, they get a little intoxicated, and they fall down. You're going to grow these similar to the native ones, except they do not want full sun. They want bright and direct light like an orchid, but they need the same substrate, and these do not sit in water all the time. Just like an orchid, you're going to soak them, and then you're going to let them dry between waterings. You might have seen like maybe 1 or 2 different types of pitcher plants, like at flea markets or plant sales. But there's 160 species, and then there's thousands and thousands of hybrids. I think I just brought a couple. One of them that I brought, see that one in the bottom that's green, that's like kind of chubby, that has purple leaves? That one is a vegetarian carnivorous plant. It used to eat bugs, but about 15,000 years ago it decided that it would rather be a vegetarian. So instead of eating bugs, it eats falling leaves. It eats detritus now. So you can say it is a vegetarian, or you could say it is a cannibal. And thank you very much for attending the presentation. So I'm happy to answer several questions. My book and lots of native plants are available for sale. I have 3 big hanging baskets, and those are $25 each, but everything else is $15, or 2 for $25, or 3 for $30, and I have t-shirts and hats that are $10 each, and my book is $20 signed, or if you buy something, it's just $10 additional, because we got to sell those 3,000 so I can make more. And the first question, I've done this presentation about 50 times, literally, in the past 2 years. And the first question is always, are they safe for cats? And then question 12 is, are they safe for small children? And the answer to both of those is yes. The pitcher plants, you can actually stick your finger underneath the lid and lick it. You have to buy it before you lick it. But it's just nectar, so it's sweet. The Asian pitcher plants, which I just have a couple of because we're the Florida Native Society, the Asian ones in Asia, they're actually rinsed out and filled with minced meat and vegetables and rice, and then people pop them as an appetizer. And has anyone ever eaten the non-native cranberry hibiscus? It's like a permaculture plant. It has red leaves. Well, that plant and these pitcher plants, they taste like a Sour Patch Kid candy. So like really sour. All right, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
Yeah, RO water okay?
Is reverse osmosis water? Okay. And the answer is yes. The scientific answer is they need 50 parts per million of total dissolved solids or less. And my rainwater and reverse osmosis should be 0. So yes, it is safe.
What if it's realkaline?
They don't like that. They don't like anything in the water. Yeah, they don't like salts, fluoride, chlorine, minerals. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
What causes the red color of so many of the carnivorous plants?
The red?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's anthocyanin is the chemical inside them that turns red. But if they're not red or if they're not dewy, they actually need more light. So that's a good way, like if you buy a sundew and they lose all their dew, they don't need more water, they need more sunlight.
Part of the reason I was asking that is some birds will have a brilliant red plumage, but it's tied into their diet.
What they're eating.
Yeah, shrimp, red shrimp.
I do know that it might be the opposite for carnivorous plants. The pitcher plants, like the native ones, they're perennials. They're supposed to live 15 to 20 years. They lose their leaves from Thanksgiving to Valentine's Day. So in the spring, they flower, then they have these pitchers. And in the springtime, they will have beautiful, dark, contrasting red and white and green pitchers. And as they fill up with bugs, the new pitchers lose color. And as the season progresses, they get less colorful and less colorful to not catch as many bugs. And if you starve them, and the way that you would do that is if you grow them in like an enclosed greenhouse, they get the most color. So the person who wins many, many, many awards at the Chelsea Royal Botanical Garden show in England, he wins every year with North American pitcher plants. And that's how he does it. He starves them. He has them in the greenhouse. And we can talk about this later, like at the table. You can fertilize them with like a weak diluted fertilizer. He never fertilizes plants that are 2 years and older because then they're just green. Because they're getting their nutrients and they're like, oh, I don't need to attract bugs.
If I could just note, Kenny and I talked beforehand. I'm from the Western New York area, and I had a fascinating opportunity a couple times with our Audubon chapter that owned a beautiful facility. The picture helping us environment.
So if you don't want to get your ruler out, just say, is this from Florida or is it not from Florida? Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned you have 5,000 rare plants. How do you feed them?
Great question. I don't. So everything now through maybe end of September, I have all 5,000 around my pool, in my pool lanai. So I have a screened, but you got 2 doors, enough bugs go in there, and they're good to go. All of the plants that I brought are fine for 20 degrees to 95 degrees. So if it freezes, it's good, leave them out. But those tropical pitcher plants, those big hanging ones, they like it 45, 50 degrees and above. So I do have a small greenhouse that I heat in the winter. And everybody's on their own. Because I'm a nursery, I sometimes fertilize, I actually never fertilize the North American ones, but I do fertilize those hanging ones. And I just get a seaweed fertilizer, and I fill a 1-gallon spray bottle, and I just spray them once every 2 weeks. So like on the 1st and the 15th of the month, I just go around like with a little pump spray. Takes like 20 minutes. It's very fast. I just go like shh. I have I'm going to tell you, this is like, you owe me a lot. Because I'm like the only carnivorous plant nursery in Florida, I'll tell you. I have a compost bin by my kitchen. Before our show, not you guys, but for a big show, I'll take a tray of sundews, lift that compost lid, kind of waft them over to the sundews. Then when I go to the show, it's like, look how good these are, look how active they are. They each ate 30 fruit flies. And I also have a butterfly net. I have ducks, and I used to have chickens and ducks, and I would take the butterfly net, and I would get like 15 big house flies, like over the manure of the ducks or the chickens, and I would release it into the pool. Because, I have my own personal collection, so I gotta feed those. But the 5,000 plants, it's not an exaggeration, but there's kind of a high turnover rate, right? So as soon as I sell 1,000, I have another 1,000, or if I have like trays and trays of seedlings, so I'm kind of like always up potting, and I don't really worry about feeding them yet. I also have a 5-minute animated TED Talk. Do you guys know TED Talks? I have 6 TED Talks. One of them is on carnivorous plants, and I have another animated video about carnivorous plants, and both of those tell you how to feed a carnivorous plant if you really want. You can buy bloodworms or mealworms or betta fish food, betta fish, and you can hand feed them, but I'm busy enough. And I would also like to remind you that no one is feeding them in the wild. Yes?
So what nutrients do they get from the insects they eat?
So carnivorous plants evolved around 65 million years ago, and they have enzymes protease and amylase and chitase, something like that. And chitase breaks down chitin, and all plants, non-carnivorous plants, have this enzyme chitinase to fight off fungus, to fight off fungal attacks. But the 900 carnivorous plants have repurposed that enzyme to, instead of being on the defense, they're on the offense. So instead of fighting off fungus, they're actively breaking down things that are made out of chitin, and all insects are made out of chitin. So they want chitin and they want nitrogen. And they're breaking down the amylase proteins, and they're also breaking down the protein enzymes. There's about, it depends on what species, but they're breaking down about 14 different amino acids. Any other questions? If you have more questions, you guys can also ask me at the table. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really enjoyed that. That
Thank
was
you.
very cool, and we know you'll be out there as
Yes.
well, so get going. You guys can definitely buy some what you need.
Ah, yes.
Do we need